Annette, can you explain how conditional acceptance enters into the development of the SOW and performance measures?
Yeah, so put on my lawyer hat here for a minute. I've had people tell me that they don't understand the difference between acceptance and approvals. So we've got a big section of this in the manual that you and I have worked on. Yep. So an approval is when you get a report or something and someone looks at it and says, yeah, this is the report that's due prior to the QBR, and I approve that it's in the right format, in the right shape and form, so we can now talk about it at the QBR. Yep. But you're not necessarily accepting that the underlying work has met the performance criteria. So what I really want to stress to contract professionals is this. We keep harping on this throughout the manual and in the training. The acceptance criteria are critical. And if you don't have them in the general terms, you've got to put them in the statement of work. And if it's not part of your statement of work template, then you have to take out your pen and put them in, or your magic keyboard and put them in. So the acceptance criteria, there's different forms of acceptance, and they're outlined in the footnotes if you want to know more about them. But we're going to focus on conditional acceptance, because conditional acceptance means I accept this when the supplier has met the conditions that I have set out in the statement of work and or the proposal, whatever format that is. When you've met those conditions clearly and identifiably, then that work is accepted. If it doesn't meet the acceptance criteria, then it's either defective with quotations, depending on how you define it, or non-conforming, again, with quotations around it, depending on how you define it in your defined terms. And this is critical because I find in performance-based contracts, people spin their wheels and go around and around because we haven't clearly identified what the acceptance criteria says, so that the supplier knows precisely what it needs to do to perform. And then some end users unhappy. And then you go back to the contract and the supplier says, well, you never told me that the poinsettia needed to be red leaves, or red flowers and green leaves. And so I made the whole thing green and you think it looks horrible. You never told me that. That would be part of the specification that you need to define.
And also you need to define a process, because not everybody's authorized to accept something.
Oh, yes.
And a really common example, I've been working with a supplier for a couple of years. I'm friendly with them. I'm an engineer. My buddy calls me up and says, hey, that thing was supposed to be delivered on Friday. How about if I give it to you first thing Monday morning? Is that cool?
Right.
Well, you're the lawyer. Where's the trap?
Right. Yeah, no, it's not cool. So
yeah, it's not cool.
It's not cool. So I've got a great story on that. So, and this is a real story. So I'm going to real time scrub out names. Okay. So I worked on the procurement side on this, and there was a, really big, like multi-million-dollar part. And then there's $100 million of service on this part. And all kinds of other ancillary parts. Okay, so I negotiated the service contract, 10 years, about $10 to $12 million a year in service. Okay, so we hand it off to contract management, and the contract manager gives me a call and says, the line of business didn't budget for this ancillary part to be custom manufactured. Okay, same person who's manufacturing the part and is providing the service, and they're going to be late in delivering this other thing that they're supposed to be delivering. So we don't want to issue the penalty for the 6-week delay in getting part C delivered to us on time, because we don't have any money in our budget for part B. So is it okay if we just tell the supplier, then just go ahead and manufacture part B when we give you the drawings, and then we won't issue the service level credit for the part being 6 weeks late, part C? And I said, okay, well, because I'm always teaching. So I said, so I'll just use the word Bob because it wasn't Bob. I said, Bob, so what are you hearing within your department, sourcing and contracting? Because I knew his boss is my boss, so I knew there was going to be a problem. And he said, well, the big boss is really irate with that decision, because we have the service level penalty for the late delivery of Part C for very good business reasons.
Right.
And the business unit's going to have to go back and find the money for Part B if they want to purchase Part B as part of this cycle. But they're not going to use the service level credit for the late part and allow the part to be late, thereby impacting another aspect of the business.
Right. It's bigger than what their perspective was.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's so important to understand things holistically, because otherwise you do stuff like that, right? You end up saying, oh, sure, that's not a problem. Well, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. I mean, sometimes it's okay to waive service credits in favor of the relationship, right?
Right.
But you could also be affecting another part of the business that you don't necessarily realize. And so you got to look at it as a system.
Yes, it is.
In fact, one thing I actually strongly recommend for contract professionals is take classes in systems thinking, or at least read a book about it, because it opens an awareness of, we have a tendency to see the stovepipe really kind of narrowly, and it opens up that awareness of this could affect that, could affect this other thing.
So we actually wrote, Jackie Crawford and I, about systems thinking and getting to we. So we'll put the link in this video of the book that Jackie suggests for good systems thinking that influenced the Getting to We book that we wrote.
Awesome.
Lawrence, what are some of the most effective ways you've used performance measures?
Performance measures are fantastic if you measure the right stuff. So it's really critical to me to figure out a taxonomy, right? That says, what is it? So you can look at, processes, and you can look at task level things, and you can go all the way up to the ultimate outcome, right? So critical success factors at the enterprise level, key performance indicators below that. So if you take like a service desk example, right? Everybody's used a help desk. You call them up and you say, hey, my computer's on fire, help, or whatever, the thing is that you're going to call them to do. Well, ultimately, why do we have in enterprises, why do you have a service desk? Really?
To answer stupid questions.
Yes, but why do they answer the stupid questions?
Because we don't know the answers?
Yes, and why don't we know the answers?
Because it's too complex.
Yeah, they're helping us solve problems we don't know how to solve, right? So the reason they're solving those problems is productivity. If my computer doesn't work, I can't get access to my applications, I can't do my work. So probably the number one critical success factor is I have productive employees, right?
So this is a brilliant moment. So let's slow this down because you're talking really fast, right? So what's the first thing that I said? Why do we have a help desk? To answer stupid problems.
Right.
So if we set a service level agreement or some other performance measure on how quickly do you answer Jeanette's stupid questions, we're not actually getting to what the underlying issue is, which is the third thing you said,
Exactly.
which is productivity. Because if I can't
Right.
use my laptop, I can't be productive, that downtime hurts the company.
Absolutely. And, oh, by the way, it can cause turnover too, right?
Yeah.
And it can cause all kinds of other things. But absolutely. So that conversation we just had, which gets to what am I really trying to solve here, and what's the supplier's role in it, right?
Yeah.
So if the key reason I have a service desk is I want productivity, is that the only measure that matters? Well, there's probably one more, right? The one more is customer satisfaction. Because let's face it, if they solve the problem and it takes 4 days to do it, you're probably not very happy.
Yeah.
If they solve the problem and they're a real jerk and talking down to you because you don't understand something about the computer, it's like, I'm an attorney, I'm not a computer technician or whatever. I'm a, whatever it happens to be that your role is, right?
Yeah.
I'm not an IT person.
Yeah.
So, if the IT person on the other phone line does a condescending way of doing it, but they still solve the problem, you're probably not going to be very happy, right? So you probably have at least those two measures: customer satisfaction, productive employees, right? There's a billion other things you could measure. Those billion other things are things like, call handle time, average speed of answer, use of self-help. I mean, there's all kinds of different things you can measure. And some of those are process things that will anticipate future problems that you could maybe preempt, right, before they impact the customer satisfaction or the productive employees thing. There's all kinds of stuff that you probably want to know, but ultimately it's those two things that matter the most. So maybe those two things become SLAs, and there's service credits at risk if the supplier doesn't have acceptable answers to those two things, right? Maybe there's some process things we want to measure and track so we know if do we need to do training? Do we need to change tools or processes or technology or whatever? So the other stuff's useful as well, but think about what's the business problem we're trying to solve. Make that the SLA that's that key measure of performance indication, right, to the supplier, assuming it's within their control.
Yeah.
If there's multiple suppliers, maybe it's an OLA or operating level agreement.
Yes.
Sometimes they call it a multi-supplier operating level agreement. And that is where if the end-to-end is,
Right.
solve my problem, but the supplier only does part of it,
Right.
I'm going to need to measure that end-to-end because that's what my end user cares about. But I can only hold the supplier accountable to their piece.
That's correct. Let's focus on that for a second. Have you seen situations where maybe someone in the line of business doesn't understand and they want to hold the supplier accountable for the entire process, meaning there's a chunk that the supplier is not accountable for and there's some resistance there? What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, yeah, all the time. I mean, the challenge is that if you think about it, unless you're an IT company, right? I mean, kids getting with an IT example. Unless you're an IT company and IT is your thing, IT is seen in a lot of cases as sort of non-value added but necessary, right? Mm-hmm. It's this crap I got to work with to do my job, but I don't really see value in it. In fact, I don't even really notice it unless it's not working, right? I mean, everybody's got a smartphone of some kind. My iPhone's working. I know my iPhone's working. I can do stuff. Just a personal example, right? If it's not working, I'm all upset, right? And so you already have this whole thing of IT is kind of a pain in my butt. And oh, by the way, I don't care, IT, that you outsource part of this work to somebody else. You're the one I'm going to hold accountable because you're not getting right. So you end up with this thing about, I want whatever it is I'm looking for, and I don't want any excuses. And so that really drives, that whole finger pointing thing and all that. It drives to when you outsource, whether it's IT or anything, you have to be transparent from the end user or customer perspective. I call it end user if it's internal and customer if they got a checkbook.
Okay.
But the person who's receiving the service really doesn't care whose fault it is. They just care that something
correct.
Right?
That's correct.
And so the trick really is to architect what you keep and what you buy based on an effective operating model, not just to make buy analysis and financial stuff. Because what can happen is you end up with this, right? I'm responsible for this piece and that's it. I'm responsible for that piece and not it. And there's something that breaks in the middle. Yes. And now you have people pointing fingers at each other.
Absolutely.
Right? And those finger pointing could turn into real significant contractual legal issues.
Oh yeah. Easily.
And so, right. And so from the, perspective of, and just back in the day, I used to have a job where I was responsible for a new product development program. Big deal thing, right? Speed to market mattered, innovation mattered, so on and so forth. And it was my piece of it. We had what's called an IPT or integrated product team. My piece of it was about a third of the cost of the product we were developing. IT, all of IT, and shared services, so the facilities, all the stuff, the things the engineers used, everything from their computer to their desk, all that stuff, was less than 2% of the dollars, right? It was a little tiny bit of dollars. It was the biggest pain in my butt. And until I actually moved into and started working in IT later on and actually got an understanding of why things were the way they were, I friggin' hated IT, right? And that's why I use IT examples a lot because I buy IT for a living and I have worked in it. But, when I was the customer, I was like, I don't care. This thing's not working. And I've got my $300,000 a year engineer sitting around doing absolutely nothing, getting pissed off and thinking about moving to my competitor. Come and fix my freaking computer, right? Well, that's actually reasonable from the customer perspective. But if you're the IT service provider, an internal IT service provider, you don't want to hear that,
no,
right?
Especially when the reason that the $300,000 a year engineer is sitting around has nothing to do with my software or my hardware.
Right.
Yeah.
It's the network. It's not the computer or whatever it is, right?
That's right.
So that's why having that empathy for the end user and trying to bake a contract and a sourcing strategy that allows that end user to get what they need And sometimes you could go best of breed and have 30 suppliers in a mix, where maybe you're better off making some trade-offs and having 2 or 1 or whatever, because then you've got, I hate the term one throat to choke, because I think that's a really negative thing, but you have somebody who's responsible for this who you can work with to go fix issues and to preempt problems before they're really bad.
Yeah, the word is accountability, right?
Yes.
What you're doing is that I get the one throat to choke, but really what you want is you want someone to be able to be accountable and on a scale, right? Or through the process so that they can take actions necessary to deliver.
Right, and can make investments. Right, I mean, one of the advantages of having a supplier do something for you is your context work. Again, on IT. IT, if you're not selling IT, is an overhead function. You might not be that great at it, but you can hire a lot of people out there who are really, really good at it. So why not give your context work to somebody who is their core function? And then they can take investments and they can move you forward, right? But you got to really understand what you're good at, what you're not good at, what's strategic to your business and not, so on and so forth, to have a good sourcing strategy to drive that appropriate mix of suppliers. And then you can get to holding people accountable, and then you can do performance-based, right? And you can also preempt all the unhappy customers pointing fingers and calling you names.
100%.